The knife blade caught the afternoon sun as it carved through bark, and Zachary Reed felt his blood run cold when he recognized his own name being etched into the ancient oak tree on the ridge overlooking his ranch. The year was 1876, and the Montana Territory still held its breath between wilderness and civilization. Zachary had spent the last 5 years building his cattle ranch from nothing, carving out an existence in the rugged land near the small town of Helena. At 28 years old, he had learned to expect the unexpected in this wild country, but finding a woman alone on his property, carving his name into a tree, ranked among the strangest sights he had ever witnessed. He approached quietly, his boots making barely a whisper against the dry grass. The woman wore a simple calico dress, faded from too many washings, and her long auburn hair hung in a thick braid down her back. She worked with focused determination, her hand steady as she guided the small blade through the bark. "That is my name you are carving," Zachary said, his voice low but clear. The woman jumped, nearly dropping her knife, and spun around to face him. Her eyes were the color of sage in spring, wide with surprise but not fear. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with a face that might have been called pretty if not for the gauntness that spoke of too many missed meals and the exhaustion that shadowed her features. "I know," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. Zachary waited for more explanation, but she just stood there, her fingers white-knuckled around the knife handle. He studied her more carefully now, noting the torn hem of her dress, the dust that coated her worn shoes, and the determined set of her jaw that contradicted the desperation in her eyes. "You know," he repeated. "You know this is my name, my property, and yet you are here carving it into a tree. Mind telling me why?" The woman drew in a deep breath, and Zachary watched as she seemed to gather every ounce of courage she possessed. When she spoke, her words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other like water over stones. "My name is Teresa Palmer, and I have been walking for 3 days to find you. They told me in town that Zachary Reed was a fair man, an honest man, and that he needed help at his ranch. I do not have money to pay for passage anywhere else, and I have nowhere to go. I thought if I carved your name here, if I made a mark that said I was here, that I existed, then maybe you would not send me away before hearing what I have to say." The words hung in the air between them, and Zachary felt something shift in his chest. He had seen that look before, that particular blend of hope and hopelessness that came from being at the absolute end of one's rope. "You walked for 3 days, he said slowly. "From where?" "From Butte," Teresa said. "My father worked in the mines there. He died 4 months ago in a collapse. My mother passed when I was 12. I had been working as a laundress, but the owner sold the business, and the new owner brought his own family to work there. I tried to find other employment, but there are 10 people for every job in that town now." Zachary removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, a habit he had when thinking. The Montana sun beat down on them both, and somewhere in the distance, he could hear his cattle lowing as they moved across the range. "And you came all the way here because someone told you I might have work," he said. "I came here because I heard you were decent," Teresa corrected, and there was something fierce in her voice now. "I have had 3 other offers of work in the past month. One wanted me to work in a saloon doing things I will not speak of. Another offered me room and board in exchange for being his wife, though he was 60 years old with 4 grown sons, and I could see in his eyes what kind of hell that life would be. The third seemed legitimate until I arrived and discovered he ran a gambling house and expected me to entertain the customers." She lifted her chin higher, and Zachary saw pride there, battered but not broken. "I know how to work," Teresa continued. "I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden, help with animals. I am not afraid of hard labor. I am asking for honest work in exchange for fair wages and a safe place to sleep. That is all. If you cannot provide that, then I will move on. But I am tired of running and I am tired of being afraid, so I thought I would try speaking plainly to someone who might understand plain speech. Zachary put his hat back on his head, adjusting it against the sun. He did need help at the ranch. His previous hired hand had left 2 months ago to try his luck at prospecting, and Zachary had been managing alone since then. The work was endless during the summer months, preparing for the harsh Montana winter that would inevitably come. He had been planning to ride into Helena to post a notice for help, but he had kept putting it off, wary of bringing a stranger onto his land. But here was a stranger anyway, one who had walked 3 days to find him. "I do need help," he admitted, "but you should know that I live alone out here. My ranch house has 2 rooms. I sleep in one and you would have the other. There is a lock on the inside of that door. I would expect you to use it. I would expect you to keep that knife of yours close as well, because I know how this must look to you, being alone out here with a man you do not know." Teresa's eyes widened slightly, and Zachary saw something like relief flood through her expression. "The work is hard," he continued. "I run about 200 head of cattle, and we are coming into the season where I need to make sure they are fattened up before the snow comes. That means long days checking fences, moving the herd to fresh grazing, making sure the water sources are clean. I need help with the horses, with maintaining equipment, with putting up food for winter. The cooking and cleaning would be part of it, but it would not be the whole of it. I need someone who can work alongside me, not just someone to keep house." "I can do that," Teresa said immediately. "I grew up helping my father before he went to the mines. We had a small farm outside of Virginia City. I know animals, I know hard work." Zachary studied her for a long moment, weighing his options and his instincts. She looked exhausted and half-starved, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself when he first came to Montana, determined to build something from nothing against all odds. "The wages would be $20 a month plus room and board," he said finally. "That is fair for a ranch hand in these parts. You would have every Sunday afternoon to yourself, and I would take you into Helena once a month, so you could purchase anything you needed or send letters if you had anyone to write to. In exchange, I would expect honest work and fair dealing. Does that sound acceptable?" Teresa's hand flew to her mouth and Zachary was startled to see tears spring to her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, nodding. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, that sounds more than acceptable." "All right then," Zachary said. "First things first. You look like you have not eaten in a while. Let us head back to the house and get some food in you. Then I will show you where everything is and you can get settled." Teresa nodded again, and Zachary noticed that she swayed slightly on her feet. Without thinking, he reached out to steady her, his hand gentle on her elbow. "When did you last eat?" he asked, concern sharpening his voice. "Yesterday morning," Teresa admitted. "I had some bread and cheese. Before that, it was the day before." Zachary felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her but at circumstances that could drive someone to such desperation. He had been hungry before, knew what it felt like to have your stomach eating itself from the inside. It was not something he would wish on anyone. "Come on," he said, keeping his hand on her elbow as he guided her down the ridge toward the ranch house visible in the valley below. "We will get you fed and rested before we worry about anything else." They walked in silence, and Zachary found himself acutely aware of the woman beside him. She was tall for a woman, coming up to his shoulder, and despite her obvious exhaustion and hunger, she held herself with a certain dignity that he could not help but respect. She had walked 3 days across rough country to find him, had carved his name into a tree as a way of making herself real, of proving she existed. There was something both desperate and courageous in that act, something that resonated with the part of him that understood what it meant to refuse to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. The ranch house was modest but well built, constructed from logs Zachary had cut and hauled himself in his first year on the land. It had a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, a luxury he had added the previous summer. Inside, the main room served as kitchen and living space, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led off from this main room, one to his bedroom and one to the spare room he had built with some vague idea of having a place for visitors, though he rarely had any. Zachary guided Teresa to a chair at the solid oak table he had purchased in Helena, one of his few store-bought pieces of furniture. She sank into it gratefully, and he could see her looking around, taking in the details of the house. He tried to see it through her eyes. The neatly swept floor, the dishes washed and stacked on the sideboard, the curtains at the windows that he had paid a woman in town to make for him. It was a bachelor's home, functional and clean but lacking the softness that a woman might have brought to it. "I have some beef stew from yesterday," Zachary said, moving to the large cast iron pot that hung near the fireplace. "And fresh bread. It is not fancy, but it will fill your stomach." "It sounds wonderful," Teresa said softly. Zachary ladled out a generous portion of the stew, thick with meat and vegetables from his garden, and cut several thick slices of bread. He set them before Teresa, and then poured her a cup of water from the pump bucket. "Eat slowly," he advised, remembering his own experiences with hunger. "Your stomach will not thank you if you rush it." Teresa nodded and picked up the spoon. Zachary saw her hand tremble slightly as she lifted it to her lips, and he turned away to give her some privacy as she ate. He busied himself with stoking the fire and putting on a pot of coffee, though it was late in the day for it. Something about the situation made him want the comfort of the familiar ritual. When he turned back, he saw that Teresa had heeded his advice and was eating slowly, methodically, her eyes closed as if savoring every bite. It made something twist in his chest, seeing someone so grateful for something as simple as a bowl of stew. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking up from her meal. "I know you did not have to help me. You could have sent me away." "I could have," Zachary agreed, pouring himself a cup of coffee and sitting down across from her. "But I remember what it was like to be desperate and alone. When I first came to Montana, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a stubborn refusal to quit. A rancher named Samuel Thompson gave me work when no one else would, taught me everything I know about running cattle. He died 3 years ago, left this land to me because he had no family of his own. I figured the least I could do was honor his memory by being the kind of man who would give someone else a chance when they needed it." Teresa looked up at him then, and Zachary found himself caught by those sage green eyes. There was intelligence there and strength, and something that might have been hope beginning to kindle again. "I will not let you down," she said firmly. "I promise you that." "I believe you," Zachary said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. They sat in comfortable silence while Teresa finished her meal. When she was done, Zachary showed her to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out over the eastern pastures, and evening light was beginning to slant through it, painting everything in shades of gold. "The bed has clean sheets," Zachary said. "There is a basin and pitcher for washing, and I will heat you some water if you would like a proper bath. The outhouse is about 50 yards behind the house, easy to see. I will leave one of the lanterns outside your door for when you need it after dark." Teresa turned to him, and he saw tears threatening again. "I do not know how to thank you. Thank me by getting some rest," Zachary said gently. "You look ready to fall over. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start work. For now, just sleep." He left her there and returned to the main room, hearing the soft click as she closed the door and, after a moment, the sound of the lock sliding into place. Good, he thought. She should be cautious. She should protect herself. He would have been worried if she had not. Zachary stood at the window, looking out over his land as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. He had not planned on taking in anyone today, certainly not a young woman who had walked 3 days to find him. But life in Montana territory rarely went according to plan. You learned to adapt, to roll with the unexpected, or you did not survive. He found himself wondering about Teresa Palmer, about what kind of courage it took to walk away from everything familiar and gamble on the word-of-mouth reputation of a rancher you had never met. Most people would have taken one of those other offers, even if they were distasteful, rather than risk the unknown. But she had chosen differently, had chosen to bet on herself and on the hope that somewhere there was someone who would deal fairly with her. The responsibility of that settled onto Zachary's shoulders like a physical weight. She was trusting him to be the man she had heard about, the fair and decent man. He would not betray that trust. He would work her hard, yes, because the ranch demanded it, but he would keep her safe and pay her fairly and make sure she had what she needed to build whatever life she wanted for herself. The evening deepened into night, and Zachary went about his usual routines, checking on the horses in the barn, making sure everything was secure for the night. When he finally lay down in his own bed, he found sleep elusive. His mind kept circling back to the woman in the other room, to the image of her carving his name into that tree. It was such a strange, desperate, oddly poetic thing to do. A way of saying I was here, I mattered, I existed even if the worst happens. He understood that need more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, Zachary rose before dawn as was his habit. He dressed quietly and went about starting the fire, putting on coffee and beginning preparations for breakfast. He was slicing bacon when he heard the soft sound of Teresa's door opening. She emerged looking rested, her hair neatly braided, her dress brushed clean of yesterday's dust. She had washed her face, and with some food in her and sleep behind her, he could see that she was indeed pretty, with fine features and clear skin that the sun had not yet weathered too badly. "Good morning," she said, and her voice was stronger than it had been yesterday. "What can I do to help?" "Good morning," Zachary replied. "You can start by sitting down and having some coffee while I finish making breakfast. After we eat, I will show you around the ranch properly and we can figure out how to divide up the work." Teresa looked like she wanted to argue, but she sat down and accepted the cup of coffee he poured for her. They ate breakfast together, biscuits and bacon and eggs from the chickens Zachary kept in a coop behind the house, and talked about the rhythm of the ranch. "The cattle are spread out across the range right now," Zachary explained. "We need to check on them regularly, make sure none have wandered too far or gotten themselves into trouble. There are predators out here, wolves and mountain lions, and while they usually leave full-grown cattle alone, they will take a calf if they get the chance. The fencing needs constant maintenance because the cattle are always testing it, looking for weak spots." "What about the horses?" Teresa asked. "I have 8, Zachary said. 2 are working horses that I use for herding and riding the range. The others are part of a breeding program I am trying to start. Good horses are always in demand out here, and if I can build up a reputation for quality stock, it will provide additional income beyond the cattle." They finished breakfast and Teresa insisted on washing the dishes while Zachary went out to tend to the morning feeding. When she joined him outside, He saw her pause and take in the vista spread before them. The ranch sat in a broad valley, surrounded by rolling hills that gave way to mountains in the distance. The sky was enormous, that particular endless blue that seemed unique to Montana, and the air was clean and crisp with the promise of the warm day to come. "It is beautiful here," Teresa said softly. "It is," Zachary agreed. "Hard but beautiful. Come on, I will introduce you to the horses." He spent the morning showing her around, explaining his systems and routines. Teresa proved to be a quick study, asking intelligent questions and paying close attention to everything he told her. When he demonstrated how he liked the horses groomed, she took the brush from him and completed the task with a practiced hand that spoke to her earlier claim of growing up on a farm. "You do know animals," Zachary observed, impressed. "I told you I did," Teresa said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. "I may be desperate, Mr. Reed, but I am not a liar." "Call me Zachary," he said. "If we are going to be working together every day, we can dispense with formalities." "Teresa," she replied. "Or Tess, if you prefer. My father used to call me Tess." "Teresa suits you," Zachary said, and saw a faint blush color her cheeks. They worked through the day, falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Zachary found himself appreciating not just Teresa's willingness to work but also her competence. She did not need to be told things twice, and she did not shy away from the dirty or difficult tasks. When they had to move some cattle that had wandered toward a weak section of fence, she mounted one of the horses without hesitation and worked alongside him to herd them back toward better grazing. As the sun began to set, they returned to the house tired but satisfied with the day's work. Teresa insisted on cooking dinner, and Zachary sat at the table watching her move around his kitchen with growing confidence. She made a simple meal of fried potatoes and onions with side pork, but it tasted better than anything he had cooked for himself in months. "You are a good cook," he said. "I am an adequate cook," Teresa corrected, "but I know enough to keep us from starving, and I can learn more if you have any cookbooks or recipes." "There are a few books on the shelf there," Zachary said, gesturing. "Mrs. Thompson, Samuel's wife, she was quite a cook. After she died, Samuel could not bear to get rid of her things. I inherited them along with the ranch." Teresa went to examine the books, pulling down a worn volume with obvious care. "I will study these," she said. "Learn to make you better meals." "You do not have to," Zachary said. "The arrangement was for you to help with the ranch work. I do not expect you to be a fancy cook." "Maybe I want to," Teresa said, meeting his eyes. "You gave me a chance when you did not have to. The least I can do is feed you well." Something passed between them in that moment, something Zachary could not quite name. It was awareness, perhaps, a recognition that they were not just employer and employee but two people trying to build something out of the chaos of their circumstances. The days turned into weeks, and summer ripened toward autumn. Zachary and Teresa fell into patterns and rhythms, learning to work together with increasing efficiency. She proved herself capable time and again, never complaining about the long hours or the demanding work. He watched her fill out as regular meals replaced the gauntness of near starvation, watched her skin turn golden from the sun, watched her become more confident in her movements and her speech. They talked while they worked, conversations that ranged from the practical to the personal. Zachary learned that Teresa had been educated, that her mother had been a schoolteacher before marrying Teresa's father, and had insisted on teaching her daughter to read and write and do figures. Teresa learned that Zachary had grown up in Ohio, the youngest of 5 sons, and had come west after his parents died because there was nothing left for him back east. "Did your brothers not want you to stay?" Teresa asked one day as they mended a section of fence. My brothers had their own families, their own lives, Zachary said, hammering a nail into place. I was just another mouth to feed, another person competing for limited resources. It seemed better for everyone if I struck out on my own. Do you hear from them? Not really. A letter every year or so, just enough to confirm we are all still alive. We were never close. He paused, then added, "What about you? Any brothers or sisters?" "No," Teresa said quietly. "It was just me and my parents. My mother had difficult births. I was her only child who survived. She always said I was her miracle." There was such loneliness in that statement, and Zachary felt an unexpected kinship with this woman who, like him, had been cast adrift by circumstance and had found herself building a new life from scratch in the Montana wilderness. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It had become a habit of theirs, this quiet time at the end of the day when the work was done and they could simply exist without purpose or agenda. "Can I ask you something?" Teresa said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course." "Why did you not question me more? When I showed up carving your name in that tree, you could have demanded more explanations, could have been suspicious, but you just accepted what I said and took me in. Why?" Zachary was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I suppose because I saw myself in you," he said finally. "Not the exact circumstances, but the determination to survive, to build something, even when everything seems impossible. And because I figured anyone desperate enough to walk 3 days and carve a stranger's name in a tree as a way of making themselves matter deserved a chance." "Do you ever regret it?" Teresa asked. "Taking me in?" "No," Zachary said without hesitation. "You have been the best thing that has happened to this ranch since I inherited it, and not just because of the work you do. It is good to have someone to talk to, someone to share meals with. I did not realize how lonely I had become until I was not lonely anymore." In the darkness, he heard Teresa's sharp intake of breath. "I have felt the same way," she admitted. "I have been alone for so long, even before my father died. It is good to feel like I belong somewhere, like I matter to someone beyond just the work I can provide." "You matter," Zachary said, and the words came out rougher than he intended. "You matter a great deal, Teresa." The silence that followed was charged with something new, something neither of them seemed ready to name or acknowledge. After a moment, Teresa stood, murmuring something about needing to turn in for the night, and disappeared into the house. Zachary sat alone on the porch for a long time afterward, staring up at the stars and trying to untangle the confused knot of feelings in his chest. He had not lied when he said she mattered. Somewhere along the way, Teresa had stopped being just a hired hand and had become something more. He looked forward to seeing her in the mornings, to working alongside her during the day, to their evening conversations on the porch. He noticed small things about her: the way she hummed while she worked, the way she was gentle with the animals, the way her face lit up when she laughed, which was happening more and more frequently as the shadows of her past hardships began to fade. But she was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and her safety. To admit to anything more than professional regard felt like a betrayal of the trust she had placed in him. She had come to him seeking honest work, not romantic entanglement, and he would not abuse his position by pressing for anything she might not freely want to give. September arrived with cooler nights and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. Zachary and Teresa worked to prepare the ranch for winter, putting up hay for the cattle, making sure the barn was weathertight, preserving vegetables from the garden. It was during this season that Zachary had to make his annual trip to the northern range to bring back the cattle that had wandered furthest afield. It was a journey that would take several days, and he found himself reluctant to leave Teresa alone at the ranch. "I will be fine," she assured him when he voiced his concerns. "I know how to shoot if I need to, and you are leaving me with the dog and the horses. Nothing is going to happen in a few days." "It is not a few days," Zachary corrected. "It could be up to a week, depending on how far the cattle have wandered and how cooperative they are about being herded back." "Then it is a week," Teresa said firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I am not helpless, Zachary. I can manage the ranch while you are gone." He knew she was right, but still he hesitated. Finally, after much discussion, they agreed on the trip. Zachary left detailed instructions about what needed to be done while he was away and gave Teresa access to the money he kept hidden in the house in case of emergency. "If anything goes wrong, if you need help, you ride to Helena and find Sheriff Dalton," Zachary told her. "He knows me, knows this ranch. He will help you." "Nothing will go wrong," Teresa said, but she touched his arm briefly and the gesture sent warmth flooding through him. "But I promise I will be careful." Zachary left early the next morning, heading north with 2 of his best horses and supplies for the journey. As he rode away from the ranch, he could not help turning in his saddle to look back. Teresa stood on the porch, one hand raised in farewell, and the image lodged itself in his heart. This was his home, but she was what made it feel like one. The trip took 6 days in total. Zachary found the wayward cattle and herded them back, sleeping under the stars and eating meals of jerky and hardtack. It was the kind of solitary work he had once preferred. But now, he found himself missing Teresa's company, missing their conversations and her laughter. He pushed the cattle hard, eager to get back to the ranch, telling himself it was just to make sure everything was all right, but knowing deep down that it was more than that. When he finally crested the ridge that overlooked the ranch, he felt his heart lift at the sight of smoke rising from the chimney, evidence that Teresa was there and all was well. But as he drew closer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were 3 horses tied up outside the ranch house, horses he did not recognize, and through the window he could see movement that suggested people inside. Zachary urged his tired horse forward, his hand instinctively checking the rifle in its scabbard. The cattle, sensing his urgency, picked up their pace as well, lowing their displeasure at being rushed. As he approached the house, the door opened and 3 men emerged, followed by Teresa. Relief flooded through Zachary when he saw that she appeared unharmed, but there was tension in the set of her shoulders that put him on alert. "Zachary," Teresa called out, and he heard both relief and warning in her voice. "We have visitors." Zachary dismounted, his eyes taking in the 3 men. They were rough-looking, with the weathered faces and hard eyes of men who lived on the edge of the law. The tallest one, a man with a thick black beard, stepped forward. "You would be Zachary Reed," the man said. It was not a question. "I would be," Zachary replied evenly. "And you are on my property. Mind telling me why?" "Name is Jack Hendricks," the man said. "These are my brothers, Otis and Samuel. We heard you might be looking to sell some cattle. We have a buyer down in Wyoming who is willing to pay good money, no questions asked." Zachary understood immediately what was being suggested. These men were rustlers, looking to purchase cattle they could claim as their own and sell to unscrupulous buyers. It was a common enough problem in Montana Territory, where the law was stretched thin and vast distances made it easy for livestock to disappear. "I am not interested in selling to you," Zachary said flatly. "Now I would appreciate it if you would mount up and leave my land." Otis, the youngest-looking of the 3, bristled at the dismissal. "That is not very friendly," he said. "We rode a long way to make you a good offer." "I did not ask you to," Zachary replied, "and I am asking you to leave. Now." The tension ratcheted up, and Zachary saw Teresa take a step back toward the house. Good, he thought. Get yourself to safety." But Jack Hendricks noticed the movement and his gaze sharpened. "Pretty woman you have here," he said, and there was a leer in his voice that made Zachary's hands clench into fists. "She said she was your hired hand. That is an unusual arrangement." "Not that unusual," Zachary said, keeping his voice level with effort. "And not any of your business. For the last time, get off my property." There was a long, tense moment when Zachary thought things might turn violent. He was acutely aware that he was one man against three, and that Teresa was behind him, potentially in danger. But then Jack Hendricks shrugged, a casual movement that did not reach his cold eyes. "No offense meant," he said. "We will be on our way, but if you change your mind about selling, we will be camping up near the North Ridge for another few days. You can find us there." The three men mounted their horses and rode off, but Zachary noticed that they headed north, confirming that they planned to stay in the area. He watched until they disappeared from view, then turned to Teresa. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. "Did they hurt you?" "No," Teresa said, but he could see that she was shaken. "They arrived yesterday afternoon. I heard the horses and thought you were back early. When I came out and saw it was strangers, I went back inside and locked the doors. They knocked and I spoke to them through the door, told them you were away but would be back soon. They camped out by the barn last night, and this morning they knocked again, said they needed water for their horses. I could not refuse that, not out here where water is life or death." "You did the right thing," Zachary said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You stayed safe, and that is what matters." "I was frightened," Teresa admitted. "The way they looked at me, the things they implied. I have seen that look before in Butt. It is the look of men who think women are things to be used rather than people to be respected." Anger burned hot in Zachary's chest. Anger at Hendricks and his brothers. Anger at a world where women like Teresa had to be constantly on guard, constantly afraid. "They will not bother you again," he said. "I will make sure of that." But ensuring the Hendricks brothers left them alone proved more complicated than Zachary had hoped. Over the next week, he spotted signs of their continued presence in the area. Fences were cut, allowing some of his cattle to wander. He found tracks near his water sources, evidence that they were surveilling his movements. It was a campaign of harassment, meant to pressure him into either dealing with them or leaving himself vulnerable to larger-scale rustling. Zachary made sure Teresa was never alone at the ranch, which meant taking her with him when he rode out to check on the herd. She did not complain, though he could see the worry in her eyes. The easy camaraderie they had developed was strained now, overlaid with tension and the constant need for vigilance. It was during one of these rides that things came to a head. Zachary and Teresa were checking the southern fence line when they heard the thunder of hooves and saw a group of cattle being driven at a run toward the mountains. Behind them, clearly herding them, were the three Hendricks brothers. "Stay here," Zachary ordered Teresa, but she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "You cannot face three armed men alone. We go together or not at all." There was no time to argue. Zachary spurred his horse forward, Teresa right behind him, racing to intercept the rustlers before they could disappear with his cattle into the high country where they would be impossible to track. The chase was wild and dangerous, horses at full gallop across uneven terrain, and Zachary's heart was in his throat not for himself but for Teresa, who rode fearlessly beside him. They caught up to the Hendricks brothers at a narrow pass where the terrain bottlenecked. Zachary pulled out his rifle, and beside him, he saw Teresa do the same with the gun he had made sure she carried. "That is far enough," Zachary shouted over the noise of the frightened cattle. "Let those animals go and ride out of here, or we will have a problem." Jack Hendricks wheeled his horse around, his face flushed with anger. You are making a mistake, Reed. There are 3 of us and only one of you. 2 of us, Teresa called out, her voice steady as she aimed her rifle. And we are defending our property. The law will back us in this. Samuel Hendricks, who had been silent up until now, shifted uneasily in his saddle. Jack, maybe we should just go. This is not worth getting shot over. But Otis, the youngest and most hot-headed, was not ready to back down. They are bluffing, he said. No woman is going to shoot anyone, and Reed is not stupid enough to start a gunfight he cannot win. Try me, Teresa said, and there was steel in her voice that Zachary had never heard before. My father taught me to shoot when I was 10 years old, and I have been hungry enough and desperate enough to know that I will do whatever it takes to protect what is mine. These cattle represent survival through the winter. If you take them, you might as well be murdering us. So you tell me if you think I am bluffing. The standoff stretched out, tense and dangerous, and Zachary found himself preparing for the violence he had hoped to avoid. But then, from behind them, came the sound of more horses approaching. Zachary risked a glance over his shoulder and felt relief wash over him when he saw Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies riding hard toward them. Thank God, Zachary muttered. Sheriff Dalton, a grizzled man in his 50s with a reputation for fairness and a no-nonsense approach to law enforcement, took in the situation at a glance. The Hendricks brothers, he said, his voice full of weary recognition. Should have known when we heard reports of rustling in the area that it would be you 3. We were not doing anything, Jack Hendricks protested, just trying to make an honest business deal. By chasing off another man's cattle, Sheriff Dalton said dryly. That is an interesting definition of honest business. You boys are going to come with me back to Helena. We will sort this out there, but I am thinking you will find yourselves guests of the territorial jail for a while. The fight went out of the Hendricks brothers in the face of actual legal authority. They were disarmed and escorted away by the deputies, and Sheriff Dalton stayed behind to talk with Zachary and Teresa. Got a report from one of the ranchers up north that suspicious characters were in the area, the sheriff explained. Figured I would ride out this way and check on you, Reed. Good thing I did. Good thing indeed, Zachary agreed. I appreciate you coming when you did, Sheriff. Sheriff Dalton's eyes moved to Teresa, who was lowering her rifle with shaking hands now that the danger had passed. Miss, he said respectfully, touching his hat. That was bravely done. Not many people would stand up to the likes of the Hendricks brothers. I could not let them steal from us, Teresa said simply. This ranch is my home now. Something in the way she said it, with such certainty and ownership, made Zachary's heart squeeze. She had called it her home, not his home or the place where she worked, but her home. It meant something, that distinction. Something important. After Sheriff Dalton left, promising to send word once the Hendricks brothers were dealt with, Zachary and Teresa herded the scattered cattle back to the main pasture. They worked in silence, but it was a charged silence, heavy with unspoken things. When the work was finally done and they returned to the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. They stood together on the porch, and Zachary found himself struggling to find words for what he was feeling. She could have been killed today. She had ridden into danger beside him, had faced down armed rustlers without hesitation. She could have stayed safe at the ranch, could have let him handle it alone, but instead she had chosen to stand with him. You did not have to do that, he said finally. Today, you did not have to put yourself in danger. Yes, I did, Teresa replied, turning to face him. Because this place matters to me, you matter to me. I was not about to let those men take what we have built here. What we have built, Zachary repeated softly. Is that how you see it, as something we built together? Is that not what it is? Teresa asked, and there was a challenge in her voice now. I know I am your employee, Zachary. I know the arrangement we made, but it has become more than that, has it not? We are not just employer and hired hand anymore. We are partners. We are friends. We are. She trailed off, seeming to lose courage, and Zachary saw uncertainty flicker across her face. He knew he was at a crossroads, knew that what he said next would determine everything that came after. We are in love, he finished for her, and the words, once spoken, felt like truth settling into place. At least I am. I am in love with you, Teresa. I have been for weeks now, maybe longer. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was not appropriate given our arrangement, but today, when I thought you might be hurt, all I could think was that I could not lose you. Not just as someone who works for me, but as the woman who has become the center of my world. Teresa's eyes widened, and he saw tears start to form. I thought I was alone in feeling this way, she whispered. I thought I was imagining things, reading too much into kindness and companionship. But I have been in love with you since the day you chose to see me as a person worth helping rather than a burden or an opportunity to exploit. You gave me back my dignity, my sense of worth. How could I not fall in love with you? Zachary reached for her, and she came into his arms as if she had always belonged there. He held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, feeling the rightness of having her there. When he tilted her chin up and kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise more than a demand. I want this to be your home, he said when they finally pulled apart. Not as my employee, but as my partner in truth. I want to wake up every morning knowing you will be there. I want to build this ranch with you, build a life with you. Teresa Palmer, will you marry me? Teresa laughed, a sound that was half joy and half disbelief. We have known each other for barely 3 months, she said. I do not care, Zachary replied. I know what I feel. I know that I do not want to spend another day without you being mine in every way that matters. But if you need time, if you want to wait, I will respect that. I just needed you to know what I was hoping for, what I wanted for our future. I do not need time, Teresa said, and her smile was radiant. I know what I feel too. Yes, Zachary Reed. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 2 weeks later in Helena, with Sheriff Dalton and his wife standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but to Zachary, it felt like the most important moment of his life. Teresa wore a new dress purchased for the occasion, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had wildflowers woven into her hair. She was beautiful, and when she spoke her vows, her voice was clear and steady, full of the courage and determination that had first brought her to his land. They spent their wedding night at a small hotel in Helena, a luxury that felt almost decadent after months of ranch living. But the real honeymoon came when they returned to the ranch, to the home they would now officially share. Zachary carried Teresa over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the main room that was now truly theirs. I want to change some things, Teresa said, looking around with a critical eye. Add more curtains, maybe paint the walls, make it feel softer, more like a home. Change whatever you want, Zachary said, pulling her close. It is your home now to do with as you please. They settled into married life with surprising ease, the friendship and partnership they had already built providing a strong foundation. The physical intimacy was new but welcomed, a deepening of the connection they already shared. Zachary found himself constantly amazed by Teresa, by her strength and her gentleness, by the way she could work beside him all day in the fields, and then transform their house into a real home in the evenings. October arrived with the first snow, light dustings that melted by afternoon, but promised the heavier snows to come. Zachary and Teresa worked together to ensure the ranch was ready for winter, bringing the cattle closer to the barn where they could be monitored more easily, stacking firewood, checking and rechecking their supplies of food and feed. It was during one of these preparation sessions that Teresa made an announcement that changed everything. "I think I am with child," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. Zachary's head snapped up from the harness he was mending. "You think?" "I am almost certain," Teresa said, and there was both joy and apprehension in her expression. "All the signs are there. If I am right, the baby would come sometime in late spring." Zachary set aside the harness and went to her, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, searching her face. "Scared," Teresa admitted. "My mother had such difficult births. What if I am like her? What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Zachary said firmly, though he felt his own fear rising. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. But he forced his voice to remain steady, forced confidence into his words. "We will take every precaution. When the time gets close, we will go to Helena. Stay there so you will have proper medical care. We will do whatever it takes to keep you and the baby safe." Teresa nodded, some of the fear easing from her eyes. "I am happy too," she said. "Scared but happy. A child, Zachary, our child. A family of our own." "A family of our own," Zachary repeated and felt wonder fill him. He had been alone for so long, had built his life around solitude and self-sufficiency. But now here was Teresa, and soon there would be a child, a family. The isolated ranch would be filled with life and love, and all the messy, wonderful chaos that came with it. Winter descended in earnest, and Zachary found himself being overly protective of Teresa. She tolerated his concern with amused patience, reminding him that she was pregnant, not fragile, and that women had been having babies since the dawn of time. But he could not help himself. The thought of losing her, of something going wrong, haunted his dreams. They spent the long winter evenings together, talking and planning for the future. They chose names for the baby, arguing playfully over options. They talked about expanding the ranch, maybe adding more rooms to the house to accommodate their growing family. They read together from the small collection of books they owned, Teresa's voice bringing the stories to life in the lamplight. It was during one of these evenings that Teresa brought up the tree, the one where Zachary had first found her. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "When you found me carving your name?" "I think about it often," Zachary admitted. "It was such a strange, desperate thing to do. But also brave. You were making yourself matter, refusing to disappear without a trace." "I was so frightened that day," Teresa said softly. "I had walked so far, was so tired and hungry, I kept thinking about just lying down and giving up. But then I saw that tree, and I thought about how pioneers used to carve their names on trees as they traveled west. It was a way of saying they existed, they had been there. I thought if I carved your name, if I made that mark, then maybe it would be like an offering, a prayer. Maybe it would make you real to me, make you into someone who could save me instead of just a rumor I had heard in a saloon." "You saved yourself," Zachary said. "By having the courage to keep walking, to keep trying. I just gave you an opportunity. You did the rest." "We saved each other," Teresa corrected. "You were lonely and I was desperate, and we found each other at exactly the right moment. I believe that was fate, Zachary. I believe we were meant to find each other." Zachary thought about that, about the improbable chain of events that had led to Teresa appearing on his land that day. If she had arrived a day later, he might have already been gone on his cattle drive. If she had chosen a different town to ask questions in, she might never have heard of him. If he had been a different kind of man, he might have turned her away. So many things could have gone differently, but they had not. They had found each other against all odds. "I believe that too," he said. and I am grateful every day that you chose to carve my name into that tree." Spring came slowly, as it always did in Montana. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing the brown grass underneath that would soon green up with the warming weather. Teresa's pregnancy advanced, and as she had promised, Zachary took her to Helena when she entered her final month. They stayed at a boarding house run by a kindly widow who had experience with expectant mothers, and Zachary found work at a local stable to pay for their accommodations while they waited. The baby came on a warm May afternoon, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Zachary pacing the floor downstairs, terrified and helpless. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he felt his knees go weak with relief. The midwife came down a few minutes later, smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife came through it like a champion. She wants to see you." Zachary took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the room where Teresa lay propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when Zachary approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Our son," Teresa said softly. "Zachary, look at him. He is perfect." Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out a trembling finger to touch his son's tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength, and Zachary felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" he asked, unable to look away from the miracle in Teresa's arms. "I was thinking Samuel," Teresa said. "After the man who gave you your start, who made all of this possible, Samuel Reed." Zachary looked up at his wife, at this woman who had walked into his life with nothing but courage and determination, and felt tears prick his eyes. "Samuel is perfect," he managed. "Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for him, for this, for everything." They stayed in Helena for another 2 weeks, giving Teresa time to recover and little Samuel time to grow stronger before the journey back to the ranch. When they finally made the trip, Zachary drove the wagon carefully, conscious of his precious cargo. Teresa sat beside him with Samuel in her arms, and they talked about all the things they would teach their son, all the ways they would shape his life. Returning to the ranch felt like coming home in a way it never had before. The house that had once been just a place to sleep and eat was now full of life, full of the sounds of a baby crying and Teresa singing lullabies, and all the small, precious moments that made up a family. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He learned to walk in the wide, open spaces of the ranch, learned to ride almost before he could run, learned the value of hard work and fair dealing from parents who lived those values every day. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Teresa gave birth to twin girls, much to everyone's surprise. They named them Rose and Lily, and the house rang with their laughter and squabbles. The ranch prospered as well, the cattle herd growing and the horse breeding program establishing a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Wyoming. Zachary and Teresa worked side by side, as they always had, building not just a ranch but a legacy. They faced hardships, of course. There were harsh winters and summer droughts, cattle that died and crops that failed. But they faced everything together, their partnership forged in those early days never wavering. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Teresa back to the ridge where he had first found her. The tree was still there, and carved into its bark, weathered but still visible, was his name. He pulled out his own knife and, under Teresa's watchful eye, carved her name right next to his, surrounded by a heart. "There," he said, stepping back to admire his work. Now everyone who passes by will know that Zachary Reed and Teresa Reed were here, that they existed, that they mattered. We matter because we have each other, Teresa said, slipping her hand into his. Because we built something real and lasting. Because we chose love even when it would have been easier to choose safety or convenience. Tell me again, Zachary said, pulling her close. What you said that day when I found you here. When I asked why you were carving my name, you told me, and I felt time stop. Tell me again. Teresa smiled, remembering. I said I was carving your name because I heard you were a good man, and I needed a good man to give me a chance. I said I was making a mark that proved I existed, that I was here, that I mattered. And then I said that sometimes you have to make your own fate, carve your own path, and trust that somewhere out there is someone who will see what you have done and understand. I understood, Zachary said. I saw you, and I understood, and my life has been immeasurably richer for it. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the life they had built. Down in the valley, they could see the ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney, could hear the distant sound of their children playing. It was everything Zachary had never dared to dream of in those early years when he was alone and building his future one day at a time. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and changed. Samuel, when he turned 18, proved to be a natural rancher with his father's work ethic and his mother's head for numbers. The twins, Rose and Lily, were different from each other in temperament, but united in their love for the land and for horses. Rose had a gift with the animals that reminded Zachary of Teresa, while Lily showed an artistic temperament, often found sketching the landscapes and people around her. Zachary and Teresa aged gracefully together, their hair turning gray but their bond only strengthening with time. They added on to the ranch house several times, creating space for their growing family, and eventually for the families their children would create. The original 2 rooms remained at the heart of the house, a reminder of simpler times and humbler beginnings. They never forgot those early days, the desperation and the hope that had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of the day Zachary found Teresa carving his name into the tree, they would make the walk up to the ridge together. They would stand before the tree, now bearing both their names, and remember what it felt like to be young and scared and brave all at once. The story of how they met became a family legend, told and retold to the children and eventually to the grandchildren. How grandmother Teresa had walked 3 days to find grandfather Zachary, how she had carved his name into a tree as a way of making fate bend to her will, how he had given her a chance when no one else would. It became a story about courage and determination, about the power of choosing to hope even when hope seemed foolish. On a warm summer evening when Zachary was 65 and Teresa 62, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown now, Samuel running the ranch with his wife, the twins married and settled on adjacent properties. There were grandchildren running through the yard, their voices high and sweet in the evening air. Did you ever imagine this? Teresa asked, gesturing to the scene before them. When you were alone here before I came, did you ever dream it could be like this? No, Zachary said honestly. I thought I would live and die alone, would leave the ranch to some distant relative who would probably sell it off. I never imagined love or family or any of this. And yet here we are, Teresa said, a smile in her voice. Here we are, Zachary agreed, because you were brave enough to carve my name into a tree and I was smart enough to see what a gift that was. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains as they had done for nearly 40 years. The ranch that Zachary had built alone and that he and Teresa had expanded together would continue on through their children and their children's children. It was a legacy built on hard work and honesty, but more than that, it was built on love, on the choice to see another person and offer them not just help but hope. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Zachary reached over and took Teresa's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Whatever challenges they had faced, whatever hardships had come their way, they had faced them together. And that, Zachary knew, had made all the difference. The years continued to turn, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives must contain. They lost friends to age and accident, weathered economic downturns and harsh seasons. But through it all, Zachary and Teresa remained each other's constant, the fixed point around which everything else revolved. When Zachary turned 70, the children threw them a grand celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army. At one point in the evening, Samuel stood up to give a toast. His own children gathered around him. "My father taught me many things," Samuel said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "He taught me how to work hard, how to treat people fairly, how to care for the land. But the most important thing he taught me was how to love well. My parents have shown me and my sisters what a real partnership looks like, what it means to choose someone every day, through good times and bad. They have built not just a ranch but a family, a legacy of love that will continue long after we are all gone." He raised his glass, and everyone followed suit. To Zachary and Teresa Reed, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for. The crowd echoed the toast, and Zachary felt Teresa squeeze his hand under the table. He looked over at her, at the woman who had appeared in his life carving his name into a tree, and felt his heart overflow with gratitude and love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, they took a walk under the stars. It was something they still did often, treasuring the quiet moments together. "You have any regrets?" Zachary asked as they wandered slowly through the pastures. "Only that I wish I had found you sooner," Teresa said. "That we could have had even more years together. But I do not regret a single day since that afternoon when you found me on the ridge. You gave me a life, Zachary. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. How could I regret any of that?" "I feel the same," Zachary said. "You transformed my life in ways I never could have imagined. You taught me what it meant to truly share my life with someone, to build something bigger than myself." They walked on in silence, and Zachary found his thoughts drifting back to that day 40 years ago, to the sight of a young woman carving his name into tree bark with desperate hope. He remembered the words she had spoken that had seemed to stop time itself, words about making your own fate and trusting that someone would understand. She had been right. He had understood, and that understanding had led to everything that came after. As they turned back toward the house, Zachary paused to look up at the stars, at the vast Montana sky that had witnessed their entire journey together. Somewhere out there, he knew, were other people carving their own paths, making their own marks, hoping against hope for someone to see them and understand. He hoped they would find what he and Teresa had found, that they would have the courage to take the chances they needed to take, that they would build something as strong and true as the love he had been blessed to share. The years after their 70th birthdays were gentle ones. Zachary and Teresa gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work of the ranch, content to let Samuel and his family take the lead while they offered advice and assistance when needed. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, tending Teresa's flower garden, reading, and most of all, simply being together. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family, a sprawling group that filled the ranch house to bursting. The original tree, the one that had started it all, had become something of a family shrine. Someone, probably one of the grandchildren, had built a small bench beneath it, and it was common to find family members sitting there, looking out over the valley, contemplating the strange and wonderful chain of events that had brought them all into being. On quiet evenings, Zachary and Teresa would sometimes make the walk up to the ridge, though it took them longer now than it once had. They would sit on that bench and trace the letters of their names carved into the bark, weathered now by 50 years of Montana seasons but still legible, still proclaiming to anyone who passed by that they had been there, that they had mattered. One particularly beautiful autumn evening, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides and the air crisp with the promise of winter, they made that familiar journey one more time. They sat together on the bench, Teresa's head resting on Zachary's shoulder, and watched as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I want you to promise me something," Teresa said softly. "Anything," Zachary replied. "If I go first, I want you to keep living. Really living, not just existing. Keep coming up here to our tree, keep telling our story, keep being the man I fell in love with." "Teresa," Zachary started, his voice rough with emotion. "And if you go first," she continued, "I promise I will do the same. We have built something too beautiful, too important to let it die with us. We will live on in our children and grandchildren, in this land we have cared for, in the story of a desperate woman carving a name into a tree and the man who saw her and understood." "We will live on," Zachary agreed, pulling her closer. "But let us not talk of endings tonight. Let us just sit here together and watch the sun set and be grateful for every moment we have been given." They sat in comfortable silence as the day faded into night, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life of love and purpose. The tree stood witness behind them, its bark bearing the marks they had made, a testament to courage and hope, and the transformative power of being seen and understood. When they finally rose to head back down to the ranch house, walking slowly in the gathering darkness, Zachary felt a sense of deep peace. Whatever time they had left, whether it was days or months or years, he knew they would face it as they had faced everything else together. And when the inevitable ending came, they would leave behind not just a prosperous ranch or a large family, but something more valuable. A story of love that would be passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes fate needed a little help, that sometimes you had to carve your own path, and that the bravest thing you could do was hope that somewhere, someone would see what you had done and understand. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's stewardship, growing and adapting to the changing times while maintaining the core values that Zachary and Teresa had instilled. The family gathered regularly for Sunday dinners, filling the ranch house with laughter and conversation, with the small squabbles and deep bonds that characterized any large, loving family. Zachary and Teresa, in their late 70s now, were content to be the wise elders, the keepers of family history. The grandchildren, and now a few great-grandchildren, would cluster around them on those Sunday afternoons, begging for stories. And while they would tell many tales of ranch life and Montana history, the favorite was always the story of how Grandma Teresa had walked 3 days to find Grandpa Zachary, how she had carved his name into a tree, and how that single act of desperate hope had changed everything. On a crisp October morning, just a few weeks after their 55th wedding anniversary, Zachary woke to find Teresa already awake beside him, watching him with those sage-green eyes that had captivated him from the first moment he saw her. "Good morning," he said, reaching for her hand. "Good morning," she replied, her smile soft and full of love. "I was just thinking about that first day when you found me by the tree. Do you remember what I was wearing? A faded calico dress," Zachary said immediately. "And your hair in a braid down your back. You looked half-starved and completely exhausted, but there was something in your eyes, a determination that told me you were stronger than you looked. And you gave me a chance," Teresa said. "You fed me and you trusted me and you gave me a chance to prove myself. That is what I will always remember, Zachary, that you saw me, really saw me when I felt invisible to the whole world." "How could I not see you?" Zachary asked. "You were carving my name into a tree that is rather hard to miss." Teresa laughed, the sound light and joyful. "I suppose it was. But you could have been angry, could have seen it as trespassing or vandalism. Instead, you were curious. You asked me why, and when I told you, you listened." They lay there together, remembering, and Zachary felt the weight of years settle over him like a comfortable blanket. They had been so young once, so full of fear and hope in equal measure. Now they were old, their bodies marked by time and hard work, but the love between them had only grown stronger, had deepened into something that felt as essential as breathing. The years from 75 to 80 were good ones, full of the simple pleasures that come from a life well lived. But time, which had once seemed endless, began to feel more precious. Zachary's strength began to fade, his body no longer able to do the work it had done for so many decades. Teresa developed a cough that never quite went away, a reminder that the years were catching up to them both. They faced these changes with the same partnership that had characterized their entire marriage, helping each other with increasing tenderness and patience. When Zachary's legs grew too weak to make the walk up to the ridge, Teresa would describe to him what she saw, painting word pictures of the tree and the valley beyond. When Teresa's cough grew worse, Zachary would sit beside her bed for hours, reading to her from their favorite books or simply holding her hand. On a warm spring morning just after Zachary's 82nd birthday, he woke to find Teresa's side of the bed empty. Concerned, he rose and found her standing at the window, looking out over the ranch that had been their life's work. She turned when she heard him, and the smile she gave him was radiant. "Come look," she said. "The sun is just coming up and everything is so beautiful." Zachary joined her at the window, and together they watched as dawn broke over the Montana landscape. The cattle were dark shapes in the pastures, the mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold. 56 years, Teresa said softly. 56 years since I walked up to that tree and carved your name into it. And every single year has been a gift, Zachary. Every single day with you has been worth all the fear and desperation that brought me here. "I love you," Zachary said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them. "I will always love you, Teresa Palmer Reed. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you to me," Teresa replied, leaning against him. "Whatever comes, whatever time we have left, I want you to know that I would do it all again. I would walk 3 days. I would carve your name in 1,000 trees. I would do whatever it took to find you again." They stood together as the sun rose higher, warming the world with its light, and Zachary felt a deep sense of completion. This was what a life well lived looked like. This was what love, real and enduring love, felt like. It was not always easy or comfortable, but it was real and true and worth every moment of effort it required. Teresa passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later, her hand in Zachary's, a gentle smile on her face. The family gathered, mourning the loss but also celebrating the remarkable life she had lived, the legacy of love and strength she had left behind. They buried her on the ridge, near the tree where she had first carved Zachary's name, a location she had requested years earlier. Zachary stood at the graveside, supported by Samuel on one side and Rose on the other, and spoke the words he needed to say. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered family. "Brave enough to walk 3 days with nothing but hope to guide her. Brave enough to carve a stranger's name into a tree as a way of making her own fate. Brave enough to trust me with her life and her future. I was blessed beyond measure to have her as my wife, and I will carry her with me until we meet again." True to the promise he had made, Zachary continued to live, not just exist. He still made the walk up to the ridge every day, though it took him longer now and he had to rest frequently. He would sit on the bench beneath the tree, one hand on the bark where both their names were carved, and he would talk to Teresa as if she were still beside him. He told her about the grandchildren and their achievements, about the ranch and how it was thriving, about how much he missed her and how every day without her felt incomplete. The family worried about him, worried that grief would steal him away, but Zachary remained present and engaged. He continued to tell the story of how he and Teresa met, continued to impress upon the younger generations the importance of courage and hope and seeing others clearly. He was not diminished by his loss. Instead, he became a living testament to the power of love to shape a life. 2 years after Teresa's death, on a golden autumn afternoon, Zachary made his way up to the ridge one final time. Samuel, grown concerned when his father did not return by evening, found him there the next morning, sitting peacefully on the bench beneath the tree, his hand resting on the carved names, a slight smile on his weathered face. He had passed quietly, surrounded by the land he loved, reunited at last with the woman who had walked 3 days to find him. They buried him next to Teresa, and the family erected a beautiful marker that told their story. It read, "Zachary Reed and Teresa Palmer Reed." He gave her a chance. She gave him a family. Together they built a legacy of love. Sometimes you have to carve your own path and trust that someone will understand. The ranch continued through Samuel and his children, and then through their children in turn. The tree on the ridge, with its carved names and the graves beside it, became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a reminder of where they came from and what mattered most. Young couples would go there to declare their love. Children would play in its shade while adults told them the story of their remarkable ancestors. And in times of trouble or doubt, family members would make the journey to sit beneath its branches and remember that courage and hope and love could overcome anything. Decades passed, then a century, and still the story endured. The ranch changed and adapted with the times, but the core values that Zachary and Teresa had established remained. The tree eventually died of old age, but the family preserved its trunk and the section bearing the carved names, displaying it proudly in the ranch house as a treasured heirloom. A new tree was planted in the same spot, and each generation added their own marks to it, creating a living testament to the enduring power of family and love. And so the story that began with a desperate woman carving a name into a tree became a legend, passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hope, that sometimes fate needs a little help, and that love, when it is real and true, can transform not just 2 lives but countless lives that follow. Zachary and Teresa Reed lived on in the memories and values of their descendants, in the land they had loved and worked, and in the simple truth that being seen and understood by another person is one of the greatest gifts life can offer. The family continued to gather every year on the anniversary of that fateful day when Zachary found Teresa by the tree, celebrating not just their ancestors, but the values they represented: courage in the face of adversity, faith in the goodness of others, the willingness to take chances on hope, and the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. Their story became not just family history but inspiration, a light to guide future generations through their own dark times, a promise that even when things seem hopeless, even when you are at the end of your resources and strength, there is always a chance for something better if you are brave enough to reach for it. And so, in a very real way, Zachary and Teresa's love never ended. It continued in every act of kindness, in every risk taken for love, in every moment when someone chose to see another person clearly and offer them understanding and hope. Their names, once carved into tree bark by desperate hands, had become carved instead into the hearts of all who came after, a permanent testament to what two people can build when they choose to face the world together.